The quest for knowledge, expansion of conservatism, and clear reasoning lives here. We are locked and loaded with truth and common sense for informed, rational patriots. Welcome to the Wildcat Patch. The best half hour of my week starts right now. I'm your host, Chuck P. Welcome to the show. I told you in the Facebook post to bring your earplugs for today and some duct tape because you're going to need to wrap your brain. You need to wrap your head to keep your brain inside so it doesn't come leaking out. But let's start us off right with an homage to our fearless leader, the limp-wristed Barack Obama. This man requires something just a little bit special.
You take a mortal man.
Oh yeah, look out, baby.
And put him in control.
Oh yes, he thinks he's a god.
Watch him become a god. Watch people's heads roll.
Oh yeah. Oh, Barack Obama. Yeah, this man's all about destruction, isn't he? You see what happened this week? Ferguson, New York City, this whole mess going on. Oh, everything's race again. I'm going to wrap up this Ferguson thing today, but it's going to go a little bit deep. We're going to get really heavy into the weeds with it. I'm going to try to paint a whole big picture of what's going on, a whole big canopy that we're all falling under. Well, you know, you gotta love Dave Mustaine, though, and Megadeth there. He wrote this song back in 1992. He had no idea what he was walking into. He's one of the strongest conservatives in music that I know. Maybe second only to Aaron Lewis of Stained. Aaron Lewis and Stained. But there's some real patriots out there in the music world. They just don't get the airtime. And their political views aren't known the way they should be. So, welcome back. Thanksgiving is over, but the damage remains. Don't know about you, but I had to loosen my belt a couple of notches after feasting. It's all the dinner table's fault, you know. I tried to quietly slip past it, and it jumped up like a rabid dog and hip-checked me into the kitchen. And there I met my demise. I woke hours later feeling violated and pregnant with turkey, taters, stuffing, pie, and pie, and pie. Whew, glad that's over with. What I'm going to dig into is really going to... it's going to get pretty long. I may have to split this into 2 segments, or maybe 3. But we'll see how it goes. I'm going to give you a little breaks in between. Because like I said, I'm going to go deep. We'll start with what happened in Ferguson. We left off at Thanksgiving episode when I was dissecting the president's speech, and there's been a lot more that's come to my mind since then, and I don't really know how to present it, but I'm gonna try to make sense out of this. Before the verdict was announced, the day before, Barack Obama, Eric Holder, Al Sharpton, they called a meeting with the protest organizers, which included the Occupy Wall Street types. The Anonymous was involved in it. The Black Panthers, the general organizing, groups that were out there, the unions and such. And his advice to them was to stay the course, to keep up the activities they were keeping up, and pretty much green-lighted everything that happened the night after the verdict was read, with all the burnings, the lootings, just empowering people to keep acting the way they were acting and make as much destruction as possible. And I tried to figure out what was going on. And if you look back through history, a lot of this has been done before. You generate your base, you separate people into neat, tidy little categories. Like right now, we're being separated by race, by economic status, by political party. And it's basically, it's a communist move. We all know his upbringing, the president's upbringing. Broken home, raised by his father figure was Frank Marshall Davis, which was Communist for America, big in that party. And his influences were Bill Ayers was one of them. He was a domestic terrorist at the time, and their whole Weather Underground movement was cops are pigs, fight the system, fight the cops, blow stuff up, and he's remained unapologetic through any of that. So what we're seeing is a culmination of decades of a man that's been steeped in the communist, socialist, Nazi type of infiltration into his brain, or indoctrination, I guess you would call it. So what I wanted to do was try to look back in history to see how this overall overarching canopy of thought was propagated earlier on. So we go back to like 1920, back in the 20s when Woodrow Wilson was president. And don't mind that noise there, that's some traffic outside. Like I said, I'm doing this from my house, and you're going to pick up some outside noise from time to time. Back to what I was saying, though. If you go back into 1920, we had just come off the heels of World War I, and in Boston, Braintree, Massachusetts, there was a highly publicized act of terrorism that took place, but they didn't realize that it was terrorism at the time. I'll make that connection here in a bit. Two men, Nick Sacco and Bart Vanzetti, they were both Italian immigrants and were self-proclaimed anarchists that fought what they viewed as violent and oppressive governments. What they did was to kill two men while committing an armed robbery on the payroll of a shoe factory in Braintree, Massachusetts. They went to trial, were convicted of murder, and after many drawn-out and lengthy appeals, were sentenced to death by electrocution, and both died in the electric chair. During their trial, one man in particular decided to employ propaganda tools through the media and the print mechanisms at the time, with newspapers, to paint both men as completely not guilty of the crime committed and that they were being persecuted merely for their political beliefs. It was a populist effort to protect the cause of socialism in America. Naturally, the socialites of the day, the actors in Hollywood, the authors, world leaders, they all climbed on board cause in an attempt to save the men from an unjust fate. One of those authors was Upton Sinclair. He's still a popular historical name that most everybody knows and heard of, but his role in the case was pretty nasty. He began writing a book and was actually published in 1928. The title of the book was Boston, which the main characters revolved around the Sacco-Vanzetti case. And as he researched for the book, he interviewed one of the defense attorneys, which was also a socialist, Frank Moore. During his interviews with Mr. Moore, Sinclair had commented privately to him that he knew that Sacco and Vanzetti were guilty, but that he was going to hide that information from the public for the sake of the cause, quote unquote. Moore filled Sinclair in on exactly what and how Sacco and Vanzetti carried out their robbery and murders, but that it was he, Moore, that took it upon himself to spin the trajectory of the case of a story to gain a populist uprising in support of socialism in America, down with capitalism and all of that. So from 1925 to 27, there were protests in all the major cities here in America, like we're seeing today. Several protests worldwide, Tokyo, Paris, London, to name a few. We're seeing that today going on. An interesting note, Sinclair's book was a favorite of Joseph Stalin, and it was widely purchased and disseminated throughout Soviet Russia. Several decades went by with the false story being pretty much widely accepted by the public, and actually in 1977, when Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis was in office, he issued a proclamation that Sacco and Vanzetti had been unfairly tried and convicted, and that, quote, any disgrace should be forever removed from their names, unquote. Syracuse University has a full-blown outdoor mural lionizing and honoring Sacco and Vanzetti on its campus. So that sets the backstory to what I'm talking about today. What we've been subjected to lately is the same type of spin through the media, the universities, being generated by community activists, propped up by academics, propagated by celebrities, and gobbled up by the masses that are only too eager to be used as pawns to achieve personal gain in the short term and effectively guide the narrative going forward for generations to come. I think we'll take our first break here. Just play a little bit of music, grab a drink or something, pause it, and we'll pick it up on the other side. And, well, we've only made it to 1930 so far, so let's just take a minute. Okay, so everybody still awake? I hope so. While we were breaking, I found this as a concurrence to what I was just saying. I found an article on homicide survivors by the author Dudley Sharp, and he wrote this. I'll just read it verbatim. Of all of those proclaiming the innocence of Sacco and Vanzetti, by far the most famous was author and activist Upton Sinclair. Sinclair met with Sacco and Vanzetti's defense counsel, Frank Moore, who told Sinclair that they were both guilty and that he had concocted all the alibis. The letter indicates why Sinclair didn't expose that conversation. Quote, my wife is absolutely certain that if I tell what I believe, I will be called a traitor to the movement and may not live to finish the book. Unquote. Sinclair wrote that to Robert Minor, a confidant at the Socialist Daily Worker in New York in 1927. He also worried that revealing what he had been told would cost him readers. Quote, it is much better copy as a naive defense of Sacco and Vanzetti because this is what all my foreign readers expect, and they are 90% of my public, he wrote to Minor. Even knowing this, Sinclair published Boston, a novel which was a novelized version of the Sacco and Vanzetti case and which proclaimed them innocents murdered by the capitalist system, the mantra of the leftists supporting Sacco and Vanzetti. So for profit and fear, Sinclair lied and more innocents died. There was much violence worldwide based upon the presumption that both Sacco and Vanzetti were innocents railroaded by the U.S. Sinclair and others throughout withheld this knowledge. So now you're probably asking, okay, great. Now, what do I do with all that information? Well, I was just thinking maybe I'll tie another analogy into it here, another little, just a little something to think about. Picture yourself as a landowner. You have a house out in the country, nobody around, it's out in the middle of nowhere. You've got a wolf that keeps running through your property. She stays up in the tree line and she sees you, makes eye contact with you, and you see her about every day. She's out doing her foraging, hunting, doing what wolves do, and you get the idea to experiment with her. So you go in and you grab a can of meat and put it in a bowl, take it out to the porch and set it down. It sits there. You keep an eye on it, but most of the day you see no activity. And toward the end of the day, she's on her way back from wherever she's been for the day, and you see her take notice, slow down, stop, look, and continue on her way. You leave it there, and you come back out the next morning, and the bowl is empty. She apparently showed up during the middle of the night when you were sleeping, afraid to come any closer during the day. So you proceed to do it again and put it out. And over the next few days, you notice that she's coming closer to scope things out during the day, but still not showing up there to actually eat it during the day. She waits till you're gone to bed. You do this for a few weeks, and all of a sudden she is coming closer and closer and allows you to stand on the porch while she comes up to eat. That's great. So she's being fed, and you're bonding with nature. She's coming closer to you now, and she's not as put off by you. You keep continuing this out for a few months, and by the end of the third month, say, you sit down on the porch and she's sitting right there in front of you eating it, and you're able to pet her head. And you think to yourself, boy, this is pretty cool. I've got a wolf that's coming up here to eat food, and I'm able to pet her. That's great. So you continue doing it, and before long, she brings her pups by and shows them that there's food in the bowl, and you keep feeding the family. And the wolves come every day, and they're all playing in the lawn while you're watching them eat. Before long, the next season rolls around, and she has more pups, and the first pack of pups are still coming to your porch and eating. You stop and think to yourself, what happens in 2 or 3 litters? How long before they're not able to hunt for themselves? How long before they just show up at your porch and start eating? And they won't be able to hunt or take care of themselves because they're used to coming to you for their food. That's where I was tying this in at. When you stack and rack people up in cities and get them dependent upon government for their existence, any type of self-preservation or self-reliance is bred out of them after a generation or two. That's all it takes. And you get to the point where when they don't have what they want, and when they don't have what they need, and government is not there to take care of them, they react violently because they think they're owed something. They don't know how to take care of themselves anymore. They're relying on the hand that feeds them. That's what we call social engineering. I'm sure all of you knew that already, but I was just trying to tie in the Upton Sinclair and Frank Moore manipulation of the media and spoon-feeding everyone a story for the cause, to tie it in with what's going on in Ferguson and New York City with the rioters and protesters. That's all part of a social engineering experiment. once you get people to react the way you want them to react, they are much more compliant to what you want to do with them, whatever that may be. A few more things made themselves evident between the 1920s and the Upton Sinclair story and what's going on today. And that is, if you look at your community and state leadership, you have Democrats from top to bottom. Democrat governor, Democrat mayor, and for all intents and purposes, the Democrat Party now is so far left, you may as well call them socialists at this point. So you had socialists in the 20s driving an agenda, whipping people into a frenzy, promoting their narrative of social injustice, social inequality, income inequality, race and gender issues, and the same thing is happening today. With Missouri, you've got a Democrat governor and mayor. New York, you have Cuomo and de Blasio for New York City. He's an outright communist. I'm not making it up. It's not me saying it, it's him saying it. In the 80s, he was a Sandinista organizer in Nicaragua, helping to overthrow that government. And today he's the mayor of New York City. And it's not just those two states and cities. If you look across all of the upheaval where all of the protest and activism is going on, you've got New York, Chicago, Detroit, LA, Compton, Dallas, all big progressive Democrat run. And I'd challenge anyone to point to any one of these cities where all of these mass protests are going on and show me one conservative form of government or one libertarian streak of leadership from the state level down through the local level. And you won't find that coming out of libertarians and conservatives, because we fight for freedom, not for dependence. And it's funny now, a few days after everything, you stand back and you listen to the media, the MSNBCs and the ABCs, CNNs, and they're all trying to point it at the Tea Party movement, that we're all a bunch of legislative anarchists or legislative arsonists or whatever you want to pin on us. But there's not one Republican, Tea Party, conservative leader in any of those areas. It's all Democrat. So I don't want to hear it anymore. As far as the cops go and the militarization of the cops or the attitude of the cops are a direct reflection of the leadership that's above them. They answer to the direct authority above them, which is your mayor and or your county legislators, city councils, and governors. So the cops are carrying out the dictates of their civilian leadership as to how to handle the population. When you have progressives in charge of everything is tax, control. So the more regulations and laws that they pass for an ever-dwindling police force to enforce, they're going to start getting real chippy with the public, and the public has no respect, like I said before. They're have any kind of self-reliance bred out of them, so it's a very confrontational issue. And when you have veterans returning home from wars that we shouldn't have been in the first place, and they have an excess of hardware and weaponry, the federal government passes that down to the state governors, and the governors tend to turn around and spread that down into the local communities. So that's why you have tanks and MRAPs and AR-15s and AK-47s and riot gear and helmets and armor, and you've got the local police being militarized like you would find in a combat zone. So let's talk about how these local leaders are handling things right now. Friday was the no bill on the Eric Garner case that happened this past July, in which a police officer took down physically, didn't shoot him, took him down with they're calling it a chokehold. And looking at the video, it was not a chokehold, it was a submission hold. The guy was resisting arrest. He was over 400 pounds, asthmatic, said, I can't breathe. And he didn't die there. He was handcuffed. He was subdued and handcuffed, taken away in ambulance. And on the way to the ambulance, he had a heart attack and died. The guy was grossly out of shape, resisting a cop, not swinging at him or anything, but refusing to obey, an order. Well, that order was given by the police officer's sergeant, his female sergeant, his female black sergeant, but that's left out of all the stories. So he was following his directive. There were 8 cops surrounding this guy because he was selling loose cigarettes, or loosies as they call them, on the street. Well, when you've got a city council and governors that are taxing everything insanely, pack of smokes right now is $17 in New York City. So people are finding ways around that as soon as those type of laws are instituted and regulations are passed. The black market kicks into high gear. I don't mean black as in race. I mean the underground, the underground marketing system. People will find a way to get what they want at an affordable price. So when you've got cops that are being dictated to enforce all these penny-ante little rules and regulations, and they're prioritized for public health and safety as they tout it, then you've got 8 cops that are circling a guy selling cigarettes versus 8 cops that could be focused on, rape, assault, murder, mayhem, destruction. They're focusing on the little guy with what at any other point in time could have been handled with a simple ticket, a fine, not arrest. So at any rate, back to the mayor and how he's handling things. This verdict came down that they're not going to charge the officer with murder. They're not going to charge him with anything. And the mayor joins in with the protesters and Al Sharpton, who organized the protest, walking side by side with the protesters, demanding justice. Well, Mr. Mayor, the cops are doing what you told them to do. They wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't your dictate. So it's a little bit disingenuous to be lining yourself up with the people, with the proletariat, as a man of the people, when the cops were doing what you told them to do. So number one, that's just wrong, period. And Al Sharpton was the one leading the protest, and he's also the right hand, I guess they call him the race czar now for the president. So once again, there's the White House getting involved in local matters. It should be handled at the city level, not even the state level. And Cuomo's been silent on the whole thing anyway. So it's just a big racket. The protesters were trying to stop the lighting of the Christmas tree at Rockefeller Center. No justice, no tree, F the tree, which was all organized by Al Sharpton. And I find it rather ironic that Al Sharpton is employed by MSNBC, which is owned by NBC and Comcast, and the lighting of the Christmas tree is in Rockefeller Center, which is put on by NBC. So there's Al Sharpton protesting an event paid for by his own company that he works for. Brilliant. So now Sharpton is calling for a mass demonstration down on the Capitol lawn next Saturday, because he's demanding that the federal government take over Missouri and New York with these race issues. And what good does that do to be bringing the federal power to bear in a local environment? If you think the cops are militarized now, wait until the federal military, police, industrial complex shows up. Well, we're over 30 minutes right now, so let's call it an episode for now. I'll catch you on the flip in part 2. See you then.